The purpose of this video is to take a printer, new from the box, load it with ink, and start printing. So when the printer comes to you, it'll be flushed. So the first thing you'll need to do is drain out all the solvents that's in it. You simply want to take the blue tube, as is marked here. All the fluid coming from the system will go through the blue tube. So we want to put the blue tube in a beaker. The pickup tubes we want to leave outside the beaker. You want to go from main menu 1 to main menu 2. F2 is system maintenance. And now we want to go to system maintenance line 3, and we'll go into manual control. Next we want to take our ink filter, the main ink filter, invert it so that the fittings are pointed downwards. You either hold it or try and attach it to something. Next we'll turn on the pump first, the relief solenoid second. That's going to drain out the main ink filter and some associated tubing. Next we'll go back to the first column on the left here, and we'll drop down to the churn solenoid. We'll energize it, and what the churn solenoid will do is it'll evacuate the viscometer and all the fluid, or rather all the tubing that's associated with the viscometer. So this printer's already been flushed, but you can see where we get a little bit of fluids out of it. Essentially we're waiting for the ink filter to be completely evacuated, which it is. Next what we'll do is we'll realign some of the solenoid valves. Essentially this lineup, if you will, empties out the tubing and components associated with the cabinet itself. Next what we'll do is we're going to evacuate the line and the tubings associated with the umbilical and the print head. So let's go down to our circulation solenoid. There is no exact order to turn these on and off. You can leave them on together or off together, and it's not going to affect or hurt the system. So once I'm at circulation, I want to turn that solenoid on. We're going to turn off the churn solenoid. We're no longer evacuating the viscometer. That's finished. Next we're going to turn on our supply solenoid. And then lastly, we will turn off the relief solenoid here at the top. So now what we've done is we're no longer draining fluids from the inside of the cabinet. We're actually draining fluids that are inside of the umbilical assembly. And we should see a little bit of fluid movement coming into and out of the nozzle. And we can see where this system is already completely evacuated. Okay, so once this process is finished, we want to exit out of manual control, and that turns off the pump and all associated solenoids. So next, we'll just take a nice empty beaker. We will load it up with fresh fluids. About 250 milliliters, about 150 milliliters to get this started, 200 milliliters. Too high and it'll trigger the overfill alarm. Too low and we could introduce air into the system. So we'll put the beaker inside of the fresh ink. Now we want to invert our filter with the connections in the upright position so the filter can fill up this time. Next we'll go back into manual control mode. First we'll turn on the pump. Second we'll turn on relief. Turning on relief begins to fill up the filter. There we go, we can see fluids being introduced now. While that's filling up, we're going to go ahead and come over to the left hand column again. We're going to drop down to churn. We'll open the churn solenoid, and now we're also introducing ink into our viscometer and the associated tubing with it. So we're going to leave the system in this configuration, and right now what we're waiting for is to completely fill up the ink filter. Once the ink filter is primed, again we're going to switch over to filling up the umbilical cord and printhead assembly. Our ink filter is almost full. We're going to turn off the churn cycle, or the churn solenoid, which will still allow the filter to be filled, but it turns off ink going through the viscometer. Next, we'll turn on the circulation solenoid. We're going to go up to the supply solenoid, and then lastly we're going to turn off the relief solenoid. And then what we'll see here is we'll see our ink come into the ink line, and it'll come down the circulation line in a moment here. And there we go. Now we know that our line is primed. Lastly, we're waiting for the ink to get down the circulation line here, where, there we go, it's populating as we speak. And from this point, we'll exit out of manual control. We'll go to system maintenance line 1, and we can turn the ink on. You want to pay particular attention not to allow your beaker to go dry, because we don't want to introduce air into the hydraulic system. But essentially, at this point, the printer is pretty close to being ready for use. You can run the printer like this. It'll take a little while for the printer to, for the ink to come up to specification. If you would like, you could drain the system again, reload it with ink after you've recirculated for a little bit, and that'll help to get the system right on top of where it needs to be in terms of viscosity. So right now the ink is on for the controller. Right now we're waiting for the flow time, a new flow time reading to come up. Right now it's still showing basically full of solvent. And there we go. There's our first reading is 63%. That's an indication that the system, or rather the ink in the system, is still too thin. So again, you could allow the system a few hours, several hours, to get up to specification, which is 100%. Or you can drain the ink out of the system per the previous procedure, reload with fresh ink again, and you'll be much closer, probably in the range of like 85 to 95%. And at that point, it would take very little time to recover. So that's how you'll load an S480 in the field and make it ready for production.